Welcome back to Unleashed, and this is going to be fun today. I'm telling you, we're going to have one of the guests on from my yesteryears that is one of the funniest guys I have ever known in my life, and he has more stories, than anything that I have ever written. So it's going to be a fun podcast today. Eric, good to see you.
Good to see you.
You got the Unleashed shirt on today.
I'm rocking it.
Yeah, I didn't wear mine today. I must have missed the memo, but
yeah,
you got it on. Looks good.
Thank you.
Yeah. By the way, we do have Unleashed t-shirts. We never really talk about it, but you can always email us in and kind of find out more if you're interested in those. So, well, Eric, what do we got today?
Okay, I've got a question about music.
Oh, right up our alley.
So Craig plays the drums?
He does. Well, he plays drums, bass, lots of stuff.
Okay. As also someone that plays the drums, I want to know, you've been in multiple bands. How do you stay humble on the road when drummers are known for being modest, the most handsome, talented? Do you have any tips or tricks for any of the other listeners out there?
That's why they put drummers. That's why they put drummers in a cage.
Yeah, they're gifted.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You have to kind of keep them separate because their aura is so strong.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can tell you're a drummer. They're always humble too.
Very humble.
Like one time they gave Craig a pin for being humble, but they had to take it back because he wore it too much.
I could see that.
Oh, so let me just go ahead and introduce my friend here. Craig Klope is who we've got on here today. And so I'll just kind of get right into the bio, and then we'll get into the fun stuff. We have been friends. I'm trying to think. Craig, we're looking at 40 plus years.
Yeah.
Jay, Bernie, how old are you, whippersnappers? A lot of water has passed under the bridge since then. So I want to do Craig justice here because he's one of these guys that's done it all. Been there, done that, and it's like you can't one up him on stuff. So I said, can you get me some information? He sent me a bio, and I think it was titled kind of like The Big Adventure, and you can elaborate on that. Not to be confused with Pee-wee's Big Adventure. So here we go. Jay, I forgot the J. Craig Klope, grew up in Kentucky. He was the youngest of four boys. He came from a musical family and played drums around the region throughout his teenage years. After graduating, he moved to Nashville. What's the quickest way to find a musician in Nashville? What is it? Waiter.
Yeah.
He moved there to pursue a musical career with his longtime friend and future Grammy Award winner, Steven Curtis Chapman. And that was before the Curtis was in that. You've known him since you guys were like babies or something. It wasn't long before he landed a gig and started traveling all over the country as a professional drummer. One weekend during a break in touring, he went back to Kentucky to visit his family, where he had learned that he'd been set up by his sister-in-law on a blind date with a girl named Laura. They fell in love and were married exactly 2 years later. This is kind of like Princess Bride here. After they married, Laura moved to Nashville with Craig, where they settled down and started a family. Baby cry inserted here. Craig came off the road for a while during that time and started listening to late night radio. Craig has one of the most cool voices for radio you've ever heard. He realized there was no celebrity talk shows and was just naive enough to think that he could start one. That's a big bite to take off. Against all odds, with no background in communications or experience in radio, this kid in his 20s started a celebrity talk show in his spare bedroom that was eventually syndicated. It was syndicated nationwide. Before long, celebrities like Glenn Campbell, Buddy Ebsen. Wow. That was what was that show he was known for? Not the detective one, but
Beverly Hillbillies.
Beverly Hillbillies.
Yeah.
Right. Chubby Checker were on a few of his shows. Didn't you also have, was it Bob Denver from Gilligan's Island?
Yes.
Yeah, Gilligan. Let's see here. During a hiatus, he received a call from a guitarist friend who he'd traveled with a few years prior, named Stacy David. Stacy would go on to have his own nationwide television show, but before that, he and Craig traveled and played together on corporate gigs. And after Stacy signed with a major television network, Craig took over and started producing the corporate shows. And this is kind of where we started getting reconnected again years later, because I think you were working, was it the Indianapolis 500? Was it like Carb Day, or was it? I'm trying to remember when.
So, I started doing that. Actually, the corporate music shows we reconnected during that time, but I never saw you on one of those. Those were mostly out in the Midwest and down in Florida area. Never made it. We never did one in Indiana, but we would travel as far as California doing outdoor expos.
Yeah.
And I would put together a band of instrumentalists from Nashville,
Yeah,
and
that's
maybe
right.
Vince Gill's keyboard player and Garth Brooks guitar player. It was a variety of different musicians. But
Forgive
before
me.
that, going back to Kentucky, the J, you mentioned J, Craig. J stands for
Yeah.
genius. I am from Kentucky.
J for genius.
Yeah, that's a Kentucky. But yeah, when I grew up, I grew up in a musical family, but I never initially never really thought of it as a profession. It just seemed like something that everybody did, and then they went on and had normal jobs. One thing I was fascinated with, young, I'm talking 8 to 10 years old. My brother, for Christmas one year, got a clock radio, and this was almost before even digital clock radios. This actually had, I don't know if you ever saw one of these, that had numbers that actually was on some type of an internal dial that would flip every minute.
Yes.
It would flip into a new number. That's how old this was. And so at night I would listen to AM radio because I remember vividly in my bed at night lying there and listening to stations as far as away as San Antonio and Chicago, because AM, as you know, at night would carry, FM would only go 100 miles or so, but AM could carry 1,000 miles or more if it was the right night and the right frequency. And I'd listen to these stations, and I remember lying there thinking, oh, this kid from a small town in Kentucky, I would just visualize what those people were doing in San Antonio or Chicago or St. Louis. And I always was interested in airplanes. When I was young, I remember about that same age, 8 to 10 years old, I would write Boeing, Cessna, McDonnell Douglas, and get them to send me all this information, and just kind of fantasize about what it'd be like to just fly around. And now, after 1,500 flights, the fun is kind of worn off on that end of it. But
how did I miss
still
that?
enjoy it. Yeah,
That you love planes. I mean, I know how much you fly now, which is crazy ridiculous. Right. But you know, you were talking about AM radio. I remember I had a little black and white radio, little AM when I was a kid. You know, we'd be out playing ball in the street, and we'd kind of get the radio tuned in and get past the static, and finally get into something and set it aside as we were playing. Whatever we were playing. But those things sounded like you were like talking into a metal cup.
Right.
That kind of a sound. Okay, true story. This is really funny. So, like everyone has their first rodeo. You have your first kiss, right? My first kiss, this is going to be an interesting story, actually happened on a school bus, but it was on a youth group trip. We all know those youth group trips. And we were going to Colorado, and they didn't have a bottle to play Spin the Bottle. I didn't even know what this game was at this time. And they borrowed my radio to spin it in the back of the bus. And the funny thing was, the first people that it pointed to was myself and this other girl who I did not want to kiss. I hadn't even my grandmother, right? I mean, that was like the worst thing in the world. But you wiping your mouth when you leave the house. And she gives me this big kiss. And I didn't know what this thing called French toast was. It was a little joke what they would call it, but that's exactly what happened. And I freaked out. I mean, it was obvious this was now my first rodeo. And the only thing I can remember taking away from that experience was she had just eaten a McDonald's Big Mac for lunch. That's my memory.
Did that make you crave Big Macs after that, or did it make you a Burger King fan?
At that point, I kind of would have rather lick the floor or something. It was.
You must have had a wealthy church to go from Pennsylvania to Colorado. As ours had about a 60-mile radius for youth groups.
Right. Hey, and so I mean, I can finish. I mean, I'll finish the bio, but we're going to be talking about what's on the rest of the bio. So we'll kind of leave it there. That 60-mile radius you're talking about, with your church and going that far. You now have traveled. Do you have any idea? You probably have never done this. I haven't either. But approximately how many miles you think you might have traveled in your career?
I don't really, I haven't figured the miles up. I'm pretty sure it's around 1 million, but I'm not sure
exactly.
exactly.
It's got to be more than that, yeah.
I know it's about 1,500 flights.
Yeah, wow.
So, some of the flights could be from here to Atlanta, and some could be to Seattle. There are a lot of everything in between. But I've never figured up the actual miles. And going back and looking at airline miles, you can kind of get a ballpark. I
Yeah.
know I've I've stayed in a ton of Marriotts. I know last year alone, I think I stayed in 178 Marriotts. And it's always over 100.
365 days. That's a lot.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
a lot.
And
Yeah.
and add to that another probably 40 Hiltons. So
Yeah. And
200
we're
plus
always like,
days.
we'll get on our phone and Facebook, I can see you're flying somewhere. And I'm like, where are you at? How long are you going to be there, man?
Yeah.
We're like ships passing in the night. I was in Vegas a couple weeks ago, and you and I, my wife, Stacy, was that last year or was that 2 years ago when we had dinner at, was it Guy
I think it was
Fieri's or
last
something?
year.
Was it?
I believe
Okay.
it was last year. Could have been 2. And time flies, but
Yeah, no kidding.
yeah,
But
yeah,
I saw
yeah.
where you were getting, you posted this on Facebook. Someone asked you if you were going to be somewhere. Then you said you were going to be down at Daytona for the 500 here in a couple of weeks. So what are you doing with that?
Yeah. So that's this week. So what's today? Monday. So we
Yeah,
fly
'cause it
there
is this week.
Wednesday. So now I do a variety of things from producing, managing, event planning, a bunch of different things. So in this one, this is a little bit different. I'm going down to help out in an area. It's at the Daytona. Most of the people that hire me, I should say, are the corporate sponsors of events. So if it's the Super Bowl or the NCAA Final Four, it would be the official sponsor usually that hires me. Same when, and we'll get to it in a little bit, like the Rolling Stones and Elton John.
Yeah.
Elton didn't write the checks; it was the corporate sponsor that hired my wife and I. So yeah, that type thing. So it's the same thing on this one. I'm just going down and this was kind of a last minute add on. My wife and I are going down to kind of help out the corporate sponsor on that one, which coincidentally is Chevy Racing, is who we'll be working with, and then a couple of weeks later we go to Sebring, go back to Florida.
Yep.
We were there actually a couple of weeks ago for Cadillac Racing at the same track, the Daytona track, International Speedway, for their 24-hour race. And then we'll go and so we do some racing. That's kind of a small percentage. It's more this year than it normally is, just by a turn of events and how things worked out. But next month we go to Sebring, which is a 12-hour overnight race, and help manage that event. That's with Cadillac Racing also.
I never think of Cadillac being like in racing. I did a
Oh
commercial.
yeah, they're very successful in their
I can
division.
guess. I mean, I did a commercial years ago for the car. It was a Cadillac style. I don't know if you remember that commercial from years ago.
Yes, yeah.
And have you driven a Ford lately? All that stuff.
Right,
We were
yeah,
talking about
yeah,
music
yeah.
and this. Well, let me kind of go back. So, taking you back to like your musical roots, like when you first started. Now, you used to always say, I remember this when we'd be out on tour together. We traveled with, back in the day, was Chapman Henderson Band, and that was Steven Curtis Chapman before the Curtis, as we were talking about a minute
Right.
ago. And you would always introduce yourself as someone who grew up in a town called Highwater?
High Point.
High Point. And you
Yeah.
would always say, interestingly enough, that's the only place that flooded every year.
Yeah.
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 And then you'd say, and if you want to know where it is, it's between, what were those two cities?
Yeah, and this was actually from, this was kind of Paducah. So High Point is basically on the outskirts of Paducah, Kentucky. And years ago, I mean, probably in the early 70s, on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, Doc Severinsen, he asked Doc where he was going to be coming up, and he said, I'm going to be in Paducah. And Johnny said, where is that? And he said, halfway between Possum Trot and Monkey's Eyebrow.
Right. I remember
And
that now.
they started making shirts about that. And so that's something that Steve and I would both joke about. If they'd say, where are you from? And we'd say halfway between Possum Trot, which is actually, they are both two little towns, about 30 miles on each side of Paducah. And they're Monkey's Eyebrow, I think, is completely unincorporated. It was just the site of the local television station antenna or something. It's just a spot in the wall, but it made for a comical description if anybody asked where you were from. But yeah, Steve, talking about, I knew him before the Curtis, or even the Steven. He was just Steve to us.
Yeah.
And we went to school together all the way from elementary school. However, he was ahead of me in school, and so we weren't friends in school. I knew him, he would be in talent shows and would win talent shows. So I mean, he was well known in the school as far as that type stuff. And he'd play his guitar that was way bigger than he was in like third grade in the talent show. And it was like, wow, he's really good for a little kid. Even then you knew he had something extra. And
A lot of people don't know his brother, but Herbie, we always,
right,
we went to school together and we traveled together. He's a talented guy.
he's great. And they would sing together because Herb was a
Yeah.
couple of years ahead of him. And so while they were in school together, like he would be in third grade and Herbie would be in fifth grade. At the talent show, Steve would sit on a stool with this huge guitar, and Herb would stand up next, and they would sing together, and they sounded great, and they'd win a lot of times. But I would just see them, but I didn't know who they were. They were ahead of me in school, and I didn't know them at all. And it wasn't until high school that Steve started playing drums with a kind of a well-known group in that area. It was a gospel group that my brother played guitar for, and had for years and years. He'd been with them, and they were family for him, and they were just part of the family. Really, the whole group. We all grew up together and went to church together. And Steve played drums for them for maybe a year or two. I don't remember exactly how long. And I was actually playing with another group that from a guy that's now in the Grand Ole Opry every week, and with the Whites. He had a group, and he was the original drummer of this group that my brother played in. They were called the Alvies.
Oh
And
yeah, that's right. I
yeah,
remember that
and
now.
yeah, and the drummer that when I was, 8 years old, I would go anytime they were doing like concert singings. I would go and sit, and I would watch Eddie was a drummer at the time. I'd just watch him and play on my knee and that kind of thing. I didn't own a drum set at all, but I would just watch and watch. And he was with him for a few years, and then he went on and moved to Nashville and started playing with other groups. But we remained very close friends, Eddie and myself. And so he called me when I was 13 and said, "How would you like to, you know, not really go on the road with us, but join the group?" Because these were groups that were regional groups. So they would do weekends, but it was always, occasionally a trip to Florida maybe, but most weekends consisted of something within 100 miles. It may be a gymnasium at a high school an hour away, or it could be a church or whatever. And so Eddie called and asked if I wanted to join their group, which I was thrilled to do. And I was 13, and I did that. The group was together for a couple years before Eddie moved with his wife Valerie to Nashville, and so the group kind of disbanded. The time I think I was 15, and so the I think my brother, I was telling you, Terry was a guitar
Yeah.
player for the Albies. I think he couldn't go to an event, and so since Steve played guitar, he played drums for the Albies. But since he was a guitarist, and they knew I wasn't playing that week, and they called me and said, "Can you fill in? We're playing at a high school gymnasium up, I don't remember where, it was like 40, 50 miles away, a Saturday night. Can you play?" And so I said, "Sure." So I went up and played. And that was the first interaction I'd ever had with Steve. Even though, like I said, we went to the same school and all, it was more just like, "Hey, how you doing?" And passing, and not close, up to that point. We weren't, we hadn't been around each other at all. And so we played that night, and it went well. Everything, I locked in immediately and was very comfortable, and they felt like I was doing some cool stuff. And Steve and the bass player, which was Steve's age, Denny,
Oh
um,
yeah.
they were thinking about getting a contemporary group together. They didn't have a drummer, and so that night they were like, "Hey, man, we've been thinking about this, doing like a little power trio. Uh, we'd love to have you join us." And so I said, "Yeah, I mean, it sounded cool. And so I said yes. And from that night on, I was the drummer with the Albies from then on. And Steve played guitar. Even when my brother came back the next week, uh, my brother played guitar, and he could also play steel guitar and other things. So they both played. But I was pretty much the drummer until I moved to Nashville, and they kind of disbanded. But So we started this group, and that I remember it was my first really paying gig, and it wasn't. It was $50 with we did this. You talk about your youth group. We did like a youth. I think it was a Halloween deal at this barn somewhere that Steve had known people. It was a youth group, and I remember thinking, man, I can't believe that. I mean, this was a long time ago, so $50 wasn't bad, and for a kid, 15-year-old. And I thought, man, this is it. This is what I need to be doing. I don't, this is the way to do it. And so we played, and we were together maybe a couple of years before Steve moved away. And when he moved away initially, and you probably remember this from stories, but he originally, and I was just couldn't believe it. He's talented. He sings, he writes, he had the whole package. Instrumentalist. And he told me one day he was moving, and he was going to school in Georgetown, Kentucky, to be a dentist. And I mean, my heart just sank. I thought, oh man, I can't believe that. I mean, that's a noble profession, but come on, man, there's all this talent. I can't believe the world's not going to hear this. And so he actually went and kind of went in pre-med or dental school and hated it. And then met a keyboard player up there, and they convinced him to move to Anderson, where you met him.
Yes.
Kind of the rest is history.
Yeah, I think it was Danny Daniels that he had met.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yep.
And that, if not for that meeting, one day I think he said he was playing out somewhere on the campus, and he happened to walk by and hear him. If that hadn't happened, he could very well have become a dentist. And no one ever have heard any of his music. It would have been a crying shame. But
it should have been Herbie that was the dentist. What was the name of the dentist from Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer?
Yeah, Herbie.
It was Herbie.
I
want to be a dentist. Yeah.
Well, that's when Herbie operating with me under anesthesia, though.
I don't know. Yeah, Herbie.
It'd be like the dentist on Seinfeld.
Yeah, we'll get into Herbie a little bit later if we can remember a story. There's some really funny. I wish we had a lot of time because there's so many funny things.
So many stories. So
but Steve and I met at Anderson College back then. I was in a practice room playing piano and singing, which is weird because I had just kind of started. I played piano since I was a little bit. Singing, I didn't do it. And he comes in with Herbie one day and he goes, man, can we try something together? And we did. The next thing you know, we're touring together. And then he goes, hey, I got this drummer friend, back in Kentucky that he could tour with us. And you drove up, and we were in a van. We were traveling down by the river, and we traveled all over the place. We were all over the place. And honestly, of all the touring, I don't know, what your life has been like, because we've had so many different directions. And those were some of the most fun days of my life.
Oh yeah, that's what I was going to say. And this happened. I mentioned, or when you were reading the bio, you mentioned Stacey David. He actually has a very successful television show now, and he's well known in certain circles. But we played together in a group after I moved to Nashville with Steve and Herb. Steve at the time signed a songwriting deal, and so he was kind of devoted to songwriting. He had not yet signed.
That was with Benson, I think.
Yeah. He was there, and he was doing demos, and that was kind of his deal. And so he wasn't singing at the moment. And so when I moved to town with him, I was wanting to play with whoever I could. And so I got a couple of auditions and went out on the road. And Stacey David was the guitar player in the first group I went out with. And looking back, it seemed like we were together years. And when we figured it up one time, it was 4 months together before he went on with someone else. But when you're traveling on the road with somebody, especially even if we were on a bus, but even a van or a bus, you get to know people more intimately than people that have worked 20 years on an assembly line with somebody. I mean, you get to know everything about their family, and you just know every funny story because you're spending 8 hours a day. With us, we were elbow to elbow in a van.
I can remember times when we would get to a hotel, and there would be, I don't remember who all was on tour, if it was just the four of us at that time, or whether Eric Horner was with us yet, or Mark Apple. But we would get to a hotel, and there would be 2 beds, and we're like, how are we going to do that? I think there might have been 5 of us at the time or something, and we would push those beds together. And somebody had to get that crack in the middle of the bed. Yeah. And I can remember, it's like a Sunday morning. We've got to be somewhere to sing, right? Yeah. And so, when you have 5 guys in a hotel room and there's one shower, and
Right.
everyone's trying to get in and out of there, we're like, Craig, get out of the shower, man. And you go, dude, I can't get this shampoo to lather up. And here you were using conditioner the whole time.
Yeah.
Oh,
We
okay.
had
So
story after
you
story.
know
Yeah.
this story's coming.
Yeah.
You know this is coming. You know exactly where I'm headed.
I'm
So
great idea.
so this one summer, we just didn't have enough room. So didn't we? It was your car with
Yeah.
the
So
van.
one year, actually, both summers, we pretty much, or the second summer, I went up and met everybody, and so the entire time we were all together as a unit. Mark Apple joined us, so all 5 of us in a van for 3 months solid, going everywhere. We went all the way down to Mexico.
Yeah.
We went down to Laredo, Nuevo, and went to Mexico.
Right.
But the year before that, we went a pretty good chunk of time together. But there was a couple of off, like 2-week off deals where I joined up with the group, and
Yeah.
like Mark and I joined up, and you guys would do your thing. This was before we kind of started traveling full, quote unquote, full time
Right.
on that first tour. But that was one of the times that you guys had gone for a couple of weeks by yourself, and you had a run where we were going through some bigger places with a lot more young people, and so you wanted the full band, and we came out and joined you. So there was a couple of week period that my car was involved, and I would follow the van, and somebody would ride with me, and so that and definitely freed up the van. So there was only 3 in there, so it was much more comfortable. But we weren't all together. I was driving, or somebody'd be driving my car. I'd be riding in the side,
So
side seat. Yeah.
And so here's the rest of the story. Who was it that always said that? Is it Paul Harvey?
Paul Harvey.
All right, so this is now from my lens. Okay, this is what I saw, because on
You were in the
one
van,
of those,
right?
I was in the car. I was driving
you
the
were
car. We were
driving.
taking turns.
Yeah,
You were
driving.
sitting in the passenger seat.
Yeah.
Steven Curtis was driving the van. Herbie was over there in the passenger seat doing whatever Herbie did.
Yeah.
And I think somebody else was like back in the back window or something, and they're kind of looking. And down south, you could get firecrackers. So we had stopped and gotten some firecrackers. And Craig, now you had to know.
Idea, actually.
It probably was. I always blew stuff up. Can't say that now. I just
Bad
did.
influence.
But this is a long time ago. Yeah, it was a bad influence. So we're going down the highway, and we're pulling up alongside the van, and I said, "Hey, let's throw a firecracker out the window." Now, Craig, you had to know, back then, Craig, he would laugh like under his breath. It was like this. He'd get doing that like this sound when he was really tickled about something. So he's got this firecracker, and remember they had like the cigarette lighters in the car. Well, he's getting this firecracker ready. We're about to pull up, and the last thing I can remember saying was, "Craig, don't forget to roll down your window." So he's lighting it, he's laughing, and the guys in the van see us coming up, and his window was down. Probably a dumb idea. But he throws the firecracker, but he forgot to put his window down, and the firecracker, and they can see it. They're laughing because they can see the firecracker bounce off the window, and the thing flies down. Well, like when you're in, I think you had like these smooth seats, like leather or something.
White
vinyl
seats. Yeah.
And the firecracker didn't go on the floor. He didn't know where it went. Well, what happened was, just like, you ever lost an M&M in a car seat and you're digging between your legs trying to get it? That's where the firecracker went. And we're all looking at him laughing, and he's trying to figure out where it is, and all of a sudden he just plugs his ears, and the next thing you know, he's grabbing his crotch because it had slid back between his legs and blew up. We had to pull off the highway, and we are walking around. He's like got powder burns, or at least on his jeans, and we're dying
I have
laughing.
3 kids, so it turned out okay. But I was a little concerned for a year or two there. But what had happened was, I remember we had thrown a few already, and we'd gotten ahead of them. I think we were on a 4-lane highway. We'd gotten ahead of them, and would time it where we'd throw it, and it would blow up right in front of their windshield. We did that a few times, and then I think I'd rolled my window up, and then we were going to do it again, and so we came up right next to them, and I was going to throw it, and so they were prepared and watching. And Steve, I think he mentioned this. We ran into him. We went to see Wicked back in December, and I think that's something he mentioned that night. One of those stories that that's just in his brain. But from their vantage point, they knew what happened. They knew it was in the car, but they had no idea where it was. But then he sees my face and my my mouth open, screaming at the top of my lungs. But yeah, that was that was something that you have never forgotten
I have
and
never. And
never not brought up.
And the other thing that I think was so funny, and I won't mention it, but there was someone on tour who um, was struggling with his dating relationship this one summer, and it might be the same house we were at in Oklahoma with the basketball goal incident, but you'd remember that one.
Yes.
But this guy was standing at the window. He'd been like on the phone for like 2 hours, and he was really sad. It was dark out. Everyone had gone to bed. It was late. We would always stay up late on those
Yeah.
tours. And Herbie, you never knew what Herbie was going to do. He kept us in stitches all the time. We're kind of standing back. We're kind of concerned about this guy, and he's on the phone looking out the window. What can we do to cheer him up? Well, Herbie was always searching through people's stuff, right?
Right.
And he goes, and he finds this Ronald Reagan mask, and there was a trampoline outside the window. And all of a sudden, you see Ronald Reagan in his underwear jump up in front of the window and disappear. And he's on a trampoline, and he's doing this, trying to cheer Mark up. And Mark, sorry, I just said his name, never flinched, right? He's just like staring straight ahead. We're dying laughing. But that was Herbie.
Herbie was comic relief.
Oh,
And
my word.
yeah, he was always, and sometimes inappropriately. It would be like a serious moment, and he would do something crazy. But that was Herbie. That's why we loved him so much. But he still has a few of those up his sleeve.
He is so funny. Oh, my word.
I remember.
Good.
I was going to say, I remember when we moved to a house years ago, and he was coming over. We invited him and his wife and another couple over, and it was going to be like, let's get together at 6:00 or whatever. And it was like maybe 5:30, and my wife Laura said, somebody's here already. And I look out, and it's Herb's car. He was driving separate from Sherry. They were coming from work or something. And his car's out there, and I step out and look. Nobody's in it. And I'm like, he's not out there. Did you hear anyone knock? And she said, no. And I go, and I look out the back window just in time to see a foot disappear under the crawl space. He was under our house. His idea was to wait till everybody got there and then like do ghost sound. I don't know what he had planned, but he was under the house, and he was always doing crazy stuff like that. But yeah, we had such a good time together. And if you look at the amount of months, even both of those summers combined, you're talking about a 6-month period.
Yeah.
But you become closer, and you know more about your fellow road buddy than any, people, like I said, that have been working the same place 20 years don't have near the connection as somebody that's traveling on the road, because you're 24/7 with them.
And there's so much talent that was in that band that at the time
Yes.
you don't know what's going to happen down the road.
Right.
I can remember pulling up to a church in Ohio after we were done, and some woman, and Steve's driving the van at this time, and so we're sitting there, and this woman comes out, and she says, the Holy Spirit told me something. She said, if you stay faithful, you're going to win more Dove and Grammy Awards than any other Christian artist ever. And at the time, you kind of drive along, you're like, I wonder what that was about. Was this person just kind of a little bit, whatever? And he did.
Yeah.
He went on to win more than anybody.
And more 50 number one songs. That's happened 3 other times, and the company has is pretty stellar. But yeah, it's amazing.
Well, and Eric Horner, who we're going to be having on next week, you and I got to talking about this. I said, man, we got to have Eric on. Eric went on to play with like Lee Greenwood and Shania Twain and some other big groups. We'll talk to him next week. But I want to go back and, outside of the corporate things or some of the early bands, I know a lot of people out there would love to hear, when you got a hold of me a couple of years ago now, you said, man, I just got asked to be a part of, I forget what you would call it, was it the Rolling Stones first?
Yeah. So that was the corporate. Before that, if you go back even a little bit, after I moved to Nashville with Steve and came off the road for a while, I kind of went back to my original roots I mentioned early on of listening to late night radio, because I worked a shift where I got off at 11 at night, and on the way home I would listen, just like I had done as a kid, to stations far away. And I realized there wasn't any talk shows with celebrities on the radio, and none in Nashville at least. And there were a few talk shows that would occasionally have a celebrity on, but unlike, like if you look at the Tonight Show or David Letterman, the celebrities that were there to promote whatever they were doing currently. So they didn't really go back to their child. They didn't get the long, in-depth Cliff's Notes version of their autobiography. They just pretty much were telling what they were, were doing at the moment. Well, on the radio, there was a station in Chicago, and I would listen to it. And occasionally, maybe once a month, they would have a celebrity on, and they would have them on for like 30 minutes to an hour. And they would go, it was fascinating. Even people that I didn't think was fascinating, people I wasn't interested in, when you heard the whole story, it was fascinating. And I got the idea of starting that in Nashville. And like you mentioned earlier, with no background in communication, no experience in radio whatsoever, I just decided to do it. I came up with a name that I thought sounded cool, the Entertainment Hotline. And I just started calling. And you mentioned Bob Denver also. He was one of the very first persons I was able to get a hold of. He was on this station in Chicago, and I listened to it, and I thought, man, that's awesome. And growing up, the Gilligan's Island was my favorite show as a kid. When I come home from the school bus, I knew every episode, 99 episodes. I had them memorized, and I watched it over and over, and I knew every episode. And so it was fascinating to hear him talk about his Gilligan's Island and what he did before and after. And so I'm literally, I'm in my 20s at the time. I can't remember exactly how long, but I remember calling. There was no internet. So I went to the library, found a Chicago phone book, went through the yellow pages, found this phone number I would call. And I remember vividly, I called, and just some receptionist answered. And I said, yeah, this is Craig Klope with the Entertainment Hotline in Nashville. And I understand Bob Denver was on last week, and we were trying to get a hold of him to be on our show. Would you happen to have his contact information? And she was like, yeah, Jack Blanchard, I think he's the one that booked that. Let me give you his number. And I'd call him. I'd say, yeah. And I'd tell him the whole spiel. And he'd say, yeah, I think John Smith out of our West Coast office booked that. Let me give you his number. And I called John. Yeah, Jack Blanchard gave me your number. Oh, how's Jack doing? I'm like, oh, great. Yeah. And he would, and within, 4 or 5 phone calls, I had Bob Denver's home phone number.
That's
and I remember
crazy.
sitting there staring at it. I remember dialing
you
the number.
couldn't do
thinking,
that now.
Yeah, you can't. And I remember thinking how it was so surreal. I'm thinking, I'm dialing this number when on the other end, and I remember him answering. It was Bob Denver. And
that had to be weird.
I said, hey, Mr. Denver, I'm Craig Klope with the Entertainment Hotline. I didn't have a radio show. I just had some name I made up. So there was no radio show. I didn't have anything. And I said, yeah, Entertainment Hotline in Nashville. I was just, we'd like to have you on the show. And he's like, okay, let me give you my agent's number and set up a time. So in the meantime, I'm like, oh, now I've got a guest. I don't have a show even. So I started going to radio stations asking about airtime, and finally got one that agreed to let me have an hour on Saturday night from 9 to 10. And I told him, I said, we got Bob Denver sitting on go, ready to go. We're ready to go. And so I started it. I had him on the show. And so I remember listening some other station, or maybe saw on television, Buddy Epson, I believe you mentioned, from Beverly Hillbillies. And he was on another show. And so I contacted that station, went through the whole deal, Entertainment Hotline. We've got Bob Denver coming up next week. We'd like to get Bob, and then, Glenn Campbell, and, just all these celebrities one after another. And each one got easier because I'd be like, I could drop the names and say, Bob Denver was on last month. We got Glenn Campbell on next week, and Chubby Checker and Art Linkletter and all these. And they're thinking all of a sudden, this sounds like a show we need to be on. And so it became easier. And so
only you could pull this off.
What's that? Oh,
only you could pull this off.
It's one of those things that now, even thinking back, it's like, how, I think naivete was my ally, because I didn't know it was impossible to do. And so I just did it. If I had thought it through and asked people, they'd have been like, oh, there's no way. But it worked out. And like every one of them had such stories. Like Buddy Ebsen was the original Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, that's right. They're going to remake that. I just saw that this year. They're remaking it. I think it's coming out at Christmas time.
Yeah, he said they put something like Vaseline all over his body and blue aluminum dust on him, and that was his wardrobe. And he inhaled some of that aluminum dust and almost killed him. He was in intensive care. While he was in the hospital, they replaced him with the 10 men we remember. But he had so many stories. All of them had stories. Art Linkletter, he was the original Kids Say the Darndest
Kids say the
Things.
darndest things. Yep.
He had so many television shows and books and things. And I remember asking him if he had a favorite story and from the Kids Say the Darndest Things era. And he said, yeah. He said one time he said, he if you remember the show, he'd have kids lined up and he would go up and kind of interview them, each one. And they were so funny because they would just say anything. And that was the thing that made the show so appealing. And it went on. Bill Cosby did a remake of it years later, but it was the number one show back in the 50s. And it was just and then he had books and everything out that came after that. But he said he had this one little boy that looked a little depressed, and he said, "How you doing?" He said, "I'm doing good." He said, "Well, not really." He said, "My dog died last week." And Art said, "Well," he said, "I'm sorry to hear that." He said, "I know how you feel." He said, "In many ways, a dog can be like part of the family." He said, "But don't worry." He said, "I believe he'll be waiting in heaven when you get there." He said he looked up, kind of puzzled, and he said, "What would God want with a dead dog?" But he had so many stories like that. They were all. That's what I was saying. It really, when, and this is something I don't do, and you may or may not do it on planes. I usually will get out a book or something, get my earbuds in. I don't start up conversations with seatmates typically. That's my time to just be alone and read or do whatever. But the few times that people have started up a conversation with me before I got the earbuds in, they've always been fascinating. And I've met some really cool people. And so just in everyday life, everybody has a story. So you can imagine if there's a little celebrity, even if it's at a low level, like I remember having somebody like Eddie Munster on, and people that Butch Patrick, he's not a household word, but people know who he is. But then we had some big celebrities on that everyone knew who they were. But even if they had not done what we think had done a lot, once you start talking to them, they always had done a whole lot more than what you remember them for. So they all had great stories, just like everybody you have on your podcast. But yeah, it was one of those things, as you know, like podcasts. It's people are like, man, you had a syndicated show, you were just killing it, and it went on to be syndicated. I had one, the Entertainment Hotline, changed into another show called Brushes with Greatness that was aired on a network out of Dallas, which went to a lot of different stations across the country. But as you know, there's a lot that goes involved, even just a podcast. Just getting guests on becomes a challenge, especially when it's a guest that has a lot of irons in the fire, like movies or TV
well,
stuff.
And management now, a lot of times, unless you have so many downloads on your podcast,
right?
There's no way you're going to get them. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's a different time than when I did it, which was 30 years ago. That's when I had my first show. So it's been a while. So it's a lot. I'm very thankful that time, and I am going to, and I've always said I'm going to write a book about that whole.
I'm going to stay on you.
And I even came up with a name because a lot of times, I started it in the spare bedroom of our apartment, and my wife would walk down the hall and she may hear, Buddy Ebsen's voice or whoever's voice coming from behind the door. And so I named it Celebrities in My Guest Room because I would, they would be, even though they weren't in my guest room. I remember running into someone who we admired and loved a lot, Christopher Cross.
Oh yeah.
And I ran into him,
right,
and he was super cool. And he was like, and I told him, when I had this show, and he said, "Oh, I love Nashville. I'm there all the time." He said, let's do it. And I'm like, I said, "I'd love to have you on the show sometime." He gave me his card and his phone number. And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Let me call you." I said, "Whenever's convenient, I'll call you and we'll do it." He said, "No, I want to come out to your house and do it." Well, I didn't want him to do that. I didn't want him to see, because on paper it sounded great. The Entertainment Hotline, for all they know, they're thinking it's some high rise on Music Row. They're not knowing it's in my apartment bedroom. And so I kept putting it off, and I never do it. But I thought, man, I should have. He was so cool. I should have had him, because I would have picked up a cajon or something and played along with him and had him
Oh
play
yeah.
Salem, just to say I played with Christopher Cross. So, but he was super humble and just a really, really nice guy. And I regret, there's couple of things like that I regret. Another time I was invited to have lunch with Zig Ziglar, who I admired, and we had a mutual friend. And he called me up one day, and I had, I've got some frequent flyer miles, so I can meet somebody for lunch and out of state, and it's not going to cost me anything. But I had just been gone on a trip, and I just came back. This was before my wife traveled with me, and I think I flew home on a Monday. And he said, "Is there any way you can get to Dallas tomorrow? I'm having lunch with Zig Ziglar, and I'd love you to meet him." Well, I was a huge fan of Zig Ziglar. I had his books. I'd listened to him for years. I'm like, oh man, and I just couldn't. I had to turn it down. I said, "Do you do it often?" He said, he said, "Well, it's not." He said, "We've done it before." He said, And I said, "Man, the next time, give me a little notice, and I will do it." And I turned it down, and of course, Zig Ziglar passed away before I could do it. But that's another him and Christopher Cross are two of my regrets of not pursuing that part a little bit more. But it
When
was
I'm
an
listening,
interesting time.
to you, all the stuff that you've done, one of the things that I frequently talk about, here on the Unleashed podcast, is about living out our purpose, willing to take risks, to do things. Because, I've never been one to want to play it safe. I'm not the one who wants to sit in a cubicle, 9 to 5 or 9 to 9 or whatever those things are, go through rush hour traffic every day. I've always been one who, like we talked about, you're on the road blowing stuff up, right? I mean, just firecrackers, just
Yeah.
having fun stuff. And that's the one thing, I can go back and I can look at my past and say, wow. I mean, there's a few people that make it big in music, and they've done really, really well financially in their career, but there's way more that haven't. I mean, way, way more.
Mm-hmm.
But most of them would tell you that they have enjoyed their life because they felt like their passion, their purpose was being fulfilled, because they never went into it to make a lot of money. Maybe that was something you had in the back of your head, but you go into it because it makes you tick. That's what you love.
Mm-hmm.
These stories, we weren't getting rich by any means, and you still don't. For the most part, when you're doing, what you love, as far as like music or doing podcasts or whatever, unless you're like someone like Joe Rogan or someone who's got a big podcast. But there's a joy that comes when you're living out your purpose. You had to travel. You were doing some of the corporate stuff. You were with the Rolling Stones here a couple years ago. You just finished up the Elton John. Was it Yellow Brick Road tour? Is that what it was?
Farewell tour. Yeah.
Farewell tour.
Yellow Brick Road. So that came about. I don't know if you remember the Field of Dreams movie.
Yes.
I'm sure you remember that. They
Kevin Costner.
Yeah, about 3 years ago, they came up with the idea. MLB, who we worked with before doing helping out at the MLB All-Star game, so we're familiar with that group of people that put that together. They were putting they had the idea of going to Iowa, to the place where the movie was made, out in this cornfield, and having the Yankees and the White Sox play each other. And it was a big, big television event. It was the sporting event of the year. It won all kind of awards. It was the highest televised. I think it may have even been higher than like Super Bowl that year.
I remember.
It was
that.
huge.
Yeah.
It was huge. And so my wife and I went out there and helped manage one of the properties. And while we were there, the guy that hired us, he kind of casually threw it out there. He said, "You guys wouldn't have any desire to go out on the road with the Rolling Stones, would you?" And we're like, "What?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "We may be kind of helping produce part of that tour for the sponsor. It was kind of like a fan zone type deal." And he said, "We're kind of looking. They're kind of wanting a couple to do it." And our knee-jerk reaction was no. Because he said it's going to be 72 days out straight with them, and we're like, no, we can't do that. And the more I actually went on and looked up their tour, and Nashville is one of the biggest hubs in the country for the interstate system. There's 6 legs of the interstates that converge downtown. It's one of the only cities in the country that many. And so I looked and noticed that most of the tour, every week they went through Nashville. They may be in Minneapolis this weekend, the next weekend in Tampa, and they went straight through Nashville. They may have been in Austin, Texas this weekend, the next weekend in New York went straight through. It kept going through Nashville every week until the last leg. So we started thinking about it. It's like, well, instead of staying at the Marriott, we can stay at our house. We can have dinner with our kids, who are now all grown anyway. So we became kind of thinking, well, man, maybe we can do this. This kind of sounded exciting and fun, and we did it. And it was at first it was challenging because it was really unlike. It was kind of like when we were on the road. So now a lot of the events I do may be usually in the city 3 or 4 days. So we'll fly in, be there 3 or 4 days, fly out. So we're not, and it's not one-nighters like we used to do, which gets tiring. The older you get, doing these one-nighters. And we were doing a lot of one-nighters where we'd be every night at a different hotel. So it took us, we really had to kind of find ourselves and get a pace and get a rhythm. And once we did, it became really enjoyable, and we enjoyed it. And as the tour started to wind down, they started talking to us. They were happy with us, and they wanted to work with us some more. And they said, I think we're going to sponsor Elton John's farewell tour next year. Would you be interested? And we said yes. And it worked out where we did it. And we went all the way to his final show in North America. His final show was at Dodger Stadium, where he had started in the 70s and was the first person to sell out 3 nights in a row and that kind of deal. And he did it again this time. And tons of celebrities and all. And I mean, we just had a great time and just really, enjoyed it. And it was a great experience. We really met a lot of friends that we'll be friends with, for life. And it was totally different than what we had done. We'd done event management, event production for years, but not like something that big where it goes on for months and months. So it was really cool to be a part of. We may do something like that again. Nothing like that on the books.
One of the things that you talk about, and we were talking about this morning when we kind of got this whole thing, ready today to get set up to do this, and it was a message that you love to deliver when you talk about your story, when you're talking about all the opportunities, about things that you've had to do. And if you would, as we're kind of moving, towards the closing here, would you just kind of share just a little bit, something you can say to our listeners, that might really encourage them to kind of, follow your passions. Because that's one of the things that, like I said, I always talk about. What is it that makes you tick? Do that. Because
I've always, yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, one of the things, and again, I think it was John Eldridge's book, Wild at Heart. He says, do what makes you come alive, because what the world needs is people who've come alive. We have a lot of people out there. We see the road rage, that's happening, and people just stuck doing the same thing for a long time. So if you would, as we kind of start to wrap up here, I want you to speak to that. Just say to our listener again, how would you encourage them to follow, their passions?
I have always felt that God has a plan. It's not always been my plan, but looking back, if you look back through the tapestry, how it's woven together, you can see how it always, if this had not happened, even setbacks that you think at the time were, maybe a job setback or something you lose, and some door closes, another one opens, as the saying goes. But that has happened so many times in my life, and go all the way back to the guitar player that had called me for this corporate gig a couple of years. I hadn't seen him in years. We'd lost contact. Well, he called me for this gig. Well, I can go back and Elton John would not have happened if he had not called me. Every person I met along the way was tied back to that. So things like that at the time, it may seem insignificant, but if you believe that God has a plan. Now, I said this the other day to my wife. I said, I let Jesus take the wheel, but I want to tell him where to turn.
Right.
And I have that problem a lot. You want to make things happen. Maybe it's God's plan. Maybe it isn't. My wife and I were talking about a future possibly opportunity coming up that you just don't, it's hard to know where, are we trying to make it God's plan? Are things falling into place for a reason? And that I don't. You may have more input on that. I wish I knew how to know for sure on that. But the thing is to be diligent and just pray and trust that the plan will come together, even if it looks like it at the time it's not going to. And
Yeah.
yeah. So
Well,
yeah,
let me just kind of bring us down here to close. First of all, Craig, thank you so much
hey,
for taking your
pleasure.
time. We're going to do this again because there's so much more we couldn't even touch on.
Yes, just scratch the surface.
Oh, but it's we've been friends for a long time, and even though we don't live close to each other, we still stay close through messaging with each other, watching where each other is traveling. But let's kind of bring it down to this at the close with this, and it would be like what I've talked before about: are you willing to risk doing something different? Are you? I mean, that's the big question. When you hear Craig's story, he created this. What was that called in Nashville? The little radio show you started. What was the name you gave it?
The Entertainment Hotline.
The Entertainment Hotline. It came out of a dream that he had. It came out of something that he thought, could this really happen? And here's the thing: he was willing to take a risk. He moved forward with something. He just kept pushing the boundaries on something. The thing that I really believe beyond a shadow of a doubt is, what's that saying? It says, a ship is always safe in the harbor, but that's not what ships are for.
Right. That's right. That's not what they were
God's
built for.
given you a purpose. He's given you a direction. You've got to learn where the wind is blowing. You have to really learn to see where God is moving. But the one thing I can say, and I've said it before on these podcasts, is when you really feel the Holy Spirit is moving you and what he created you to do, stay the course.
Right.
Because there's new lands and places. Yeah.
With the risk, especially for younger people, if they have families and all. I've taken some risks, but I've always taken calculated risks. I never wanted to jeopardize and put my family or my household or something in a position that could come crumbling
first.
down.
Yep.
So I'm a firm believer in following your dreams, taking risks, but I think doing your homework and making sure that if everything implodes and comes crumbling down, then you're still protected and you're not going to be homeless.
Yep. And again, like we always say, remember, your identity is in Christ. No matter whether you become famous and make all this money and have everyone know your name, or you're just this person in your upstairs thing doing a little AM radio show, but you're doing what you love, find that thing. Do that thing, because that's what's going to keep the joy and the passion alive in your life. Craig, buddy, thank you so much for being a part of the show today, and I can't wait till the next one, man.
Looking forward to it. Have a great day.
Love you, brother.
Love you.
We'll see you guys next time.
Okay.